Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be discussing the Configuring Native JTI with AppFormix Learning Byte. All right, so here is the example. In this example, we have a Contrail cluster that is using AppFormix, and we have 5 different nodes. We have the AppFormix controller, then we have the OpenStack node, which houses the SDN functionality like Contrail and OpenStack and the other database and other things that go along with Contrail. And then we have Compute 1 and Compute 2. Now those Compute nodes house the VMs. They have the vRouter functionality. And so those VMs will be sending traffic back and forth. And then lastly, we have a VMX device, which is acting as the underlay network device. So what we want to do here is we want to monitor the metrics and statistics on VMX, which is going to be part of the underlay network using native JTI. And so we got a few steps we got to do. We need to configure the all file, and this is going to be on the AppFormix device, the AppFormix controller. Then we need to configure the network devices topology file, and then we need to configure the VMX device. Now, there's not a lot of configuration that happens here, but we'll go into some things we need to look out for. And then after that's all done, after it's set up, we are going to examine the VMX and the AppFormix user interface and see how things show up there. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to jump to the VMX CLI first and get started there. All right, so here is the VMX device, and the first thing we need to check is we need to make sure that we can use, or rather the AppFormix controller can use netconf over SSH to configure the device. And so let's go ahead and jump into configuration mode, and let's look under the system services. And we can see there that SSH is configured, but that only allows us to SSH to the box. It does not allow us to use netconf over SSH to configure the device. So we need to configure that. And so we use that command to configure it. And the other thing we want to check is the interface configuration. Now, this might seem fine, but if you know anything about native JTI, it exports the data as close to the source as possible. And so that means that the source, or where it comes from, where that data is being exported from, needs to come from the forwarding plane. Currently, we're going to be accessing the VMX device using that IP address that we see on the FXP0 interface. And so if we left this configuration as is, that would be problematic. We would be trying to send the JTI packets from the FXP0 interface, which is the control plane. That's not going to work. So we need to change that. And what we could do here, I do have the lab set up in a special way that we can set up an IRB interface for this purpose with that same IP address. So I'm going to make a few changes here. I'm going to rename that FXP0 interface to IRB. And now that's an IRB interface. Now we have to set that IRB interface in a bridge domain. Show what's under here, just the V1 bridge domain. And so that's going to be set in that bridge domain. So I'm going to commit that configuration now. All right, that commit is complete. And the other thing I do want to show you here is that under the services analytics configuration section, there's no configuration here. When we configure native JTI, we will see configuration under the services analytics configuration section. Okay, so with that, let's jump to the AppFormix device. So here's the AppFormix device or AppFormix controller. And so with this, we need to configure first the all file. And I have that set under the AppFormix inventory group vars directory. And we see we have the all file there. So we need to edit that. And there's a few things we need to add. We need to add some plugin information. And I'm just, instead of typing this out for the sake of time, I'm going to just copy and paste this from another file. So we need to add in a plugin. It's the JTI network device usage JSON plugin. And so I'm going to add that in. And then need to add in a little bit more. Need to add in the AppFormix network device monitoring enabled equals true parameter. And then need to add in reference to the network devices topology file. And this is the network device file name parameter. And then we're specifying where we're going to find the network device JSON file, and that is specified under the path and then the actual file name. So I'm going to save that, and then we need to edit that actual file name, or the network devices topology file. And that's going to be indevices-jti.json. All right, so here is the indevices-jti.json file, and this is already pre-configured, but I am going to point out what you need to configure. I'm not going to just configure it all right now just for the sake of time. And so the first thing I do want to point out is you have to specify under JTI config, you have to specify the version number. Now this is going to be the version number of the actual network device. So this is the version number, the Junos version number of VMX. And then we have the username and password, and those are the credentials that AppFormix is going to use to access the VMX device using netconf over SSH. And then we have the report rate. Now this is the rate in seconds that we're going to be reporting data. Because how JTI works is you have the controller, the AppFormix controller, subscribe the device, and that subscription happens once, and then that device periodically sends metric information. So it's going to send it every 60 seconds. DSCP, that's set to 0 currently. That means it's not going to set the DSCP bits at all. You can change that to whatever you like. The device local port, that's the port that we're going to be listening on. Sensor list. Now this is important. The sensor list is the sensors that you're going to be monitoring. So these sensors are going to then send metrics, and each sensor has multiple metrics that it sends, and you're going to have the name of the sensor. Now this name can be whatever you want. You name this, it's unique within your setup, but the resource that you have underneath that is very important that you set that name specifically to what it's supposed to be. And then notice that I do have 2 different sensors, and the thing that's a little strange here is getting the syntax right. This is a JSON file, and so that syntax has to be specifically right. So keep that in mind as you're doing this, that you're going to have commas that are delimiters in certain spots, and you're not going to have in other spots. Okay, so management IP, that's the IP address we're using to access the VMX device. And remember that needed to be a data plane interface and not an control plane interface. So keep that in mind. The name VMX, that's just what it's going to show up in AppFormix as. Source user.jti. That's very important that we specify user.jti. If we were doing gRPC, we'd specify user.grpc. And so keep that in mind. Network device ID, that's going to be unique. We're just setting that to VMX. Now the chassis type field, this is something that is going to be local to AppFormix. This is what's going to show up in AppFormix. There's a few different options you can specify here. We're specifying core switch here. Then connection info. Now this area or section is important if you are manually mapping the connections. And so with this is something that can be done automatically in AppFormix using LLDP and SNMP. But we're not going to go over that. That would be quite a long learning byte. We're just focusing on the manual way of mapping the connections. And so we have the connection info section, and we have the local interface, which is the local interface of VMX. And then we have the remote interface, which is ENS160, and remote system ID compute 1. So that's basically saying that VMX connects to compute 1 using Gigi000, and compute 1 interface is ENS160. And that process is repeated for the next connection. Local interface name Gigi001, so Gigi001 on VMX connects to compute 2 on ENS160. So that's how you specify that file. So you go ahead and save that, and then what we need to do here is we need to set the environmental variables with OpenStack. And then we can check it. We see that it's set to password. We could leave off. We just set grep OS to see all the environmental variables, but that password one is very important because that's the one that you have a chance of messing up. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now that we have that set, we're going to go to the images, AppFormix, and then we're going to run the script. Now this script, what it will do is it's the OpenStack script, and it'll add this information. We added this information in under the all file and the network devices topology file. And so this script will run those files and set up JTI with the VMX device. Okay, and the script will take a few minutes to run, probably around 5 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video, and after the script's done running, I'll get back and we'll go through what happened. All right, so the script completed, nothing failed, everything went through successfully. That's perfect, that's what we want to see. If it does fail, it's going to give you a little bit of information on why it failed, so you can troubleshoot it from there. A lot of times it has issues with the network devices topology file or something in the all file. So keep that in mind. It's really easy to make a syntax error. So if this does fail at this point and you already have an up and working AppFormix cluster, I would definitely recommend checking those files out. So let's go ahead and jump to the AppFormix user interface and have a look at things. All right, so here is the AppFormix user interface. And right off the bat, I want to point out under the physical infrastructure section, we have one network device. That's awesome. That's what we want to see. That wasn't there beforehand. I didn't show you that, but if I would have shown you, there would have been nothing there. And so we can click on that and we can see that it's the VMX device. Perfect. Let's go ahead and click on VMX. And we can see some information here. We can see the health and risk status, which are good. We can see the source is user.jti. Things look good. And so let's go ahead and click on the charts shortcut. And here under charts, we can see that we are receiving metrics. We see statistics that are being shown. That's perfect. That's what we want to see. These metrics are being delivered through native JTI. And so then with this, you could set up the different aspects of AppFormix with this. So for example, you could set some alarms. You could set a static or dynamic alarm based on input or output traffic, based on memory usage, based on CPU usage. And so you can treat this as any other AppFormix node that AppFormix would monitor. And you can create reports or other things. You can see the heat map for it. So there's a lot of flexibility here that you can now do with the VMX device, which is part of your underlay network in the setup. That's the whole point of this, is being able to gain visibility into your underlay network. So let's click on network topology and look at those manual connections that we set up. So under network topology, we see up here on the top left, we have overlay or underlay. The underlay is selected by default. That's where we want to be. And then you need to click on the cluster. And we're going to click cluster-1. And you can move the background around by grabbing it with the mouse and moving it. And I'm going to zoom in here, get a closer look, and we can see that we have VMX1 connected to Compute 1 and Compute 2. And we can select Compute 1 and Compute 2, and that's going to expand the different instances that they have associated with themselves. And then we can select VMX1 and we can find out more information about it. We can see the health and risk status. Everything looks good there. Then we can see the local, remote, and remote system name. So we can see that Gigi000 is connected to ENS 160 on Compute 1. We can see that Gigi001 is connected to ENS 160 on Compute 2. And so we can see how the underlay network is working, how it's connected, and this is what you should be seeing if you have native JTI set up correctly. So that brings us to the end of this Learning Byte. In this Learning Byte, we discussed how to configure native JTI, and then we demonstrated how to verify native JTI usage. So as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses, learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths, Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence, and the training community. From forums to social media, join the discussion.